Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks, and I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and I'm so glad that you're here today. I'll introduce Nia in just a moment, but I wanted to say that the song she selected is just so perfect. I hope you enjoyed the jazz coming in as much as I did. I think the playing together, the blending of sounds, the listening to other people, there's just so many parallels with collaboration, which is what we'll be diving into today. And we'll reach out in just a moment. First, I want to share a bit about Stories Change Power. We provide practical and effective strategies for making a difference in your neighborhood, your community, and your country. And we do that through learning communities, workshops, and one-on-one coaching. If you're interested in being an effective change maker or your organization is needing to improve your storytelling in 2025, let's connect. We'll put some links in the chat. And I thank Rebecca Messer, our tech support, for making those magically pop up, including a way to find out what we mean by being on the yellow loop with us. Be sure you stay linked in with us as well on LinkedIn. Four quick things before we dive into collaboration. One, we've got the chat open for constructive conversation today. Where you've got questions, please put those in the Q&A. You'll see a little box at the bottom of your screen with a question mark. If we can't reach your question today, we'll share that in an upcoming newsletter or LinkedIn. We will get back to you. Secondly, we've got captions enabled, so please use those if they're helpful to you. Third, if you have any tech difficulties or need to step away, do not worry, we will share the recording. I know there are a lot of things going end of year, so we'll have that recording available for you. And to that end, our fourth point, the end of year is so busy, especially we've got holiday planning, gift shopping, a lot of pro-democracy conferences that I know a lot of folks have been in the past 2 weeks. So I encourage you now, just take a breath and be fully present with us. Use being off camera and off microphone to do what you need to take care of you and focus, because you are going to want to hear what Nia Davis Sagona has to say today. She is the consultant and coach behind Root and Bloom Strategies, a social impact agency that is helping leaders break down silos and build up collaborative teams and coalition. Nia is also a lawyer by training and someone I had the absolute pleasure of crossing paths with in our higher education space. She is an advocate at heart, attorney by training, and an expert at navigating ecosystems of people, process, policy, and practice. She is bringing her 15 plus years of interdisciplinary leadership throughout cradle to career education, law, policy, and practice to our webinar today. She translates a group's good intent into collective impact, and her leadership is very wide-ranging across school district policy, charter school accountability, community college transfer systems, post-secondary education, federal policy, and civic leadership development, all to center Black and Brown learners in equitable ecosystems. With Root and Bloom Strategies, she connects people and ideas to change systems that change the world. So Nia, thank you so much for being with us today. And before I hand it over to you to present your framework on collaboration, I want to start with a quick poll. So everybody, please be ready with your mouse or thumb tips to share in the chat. We want to get a sense of who's with us today. And so you'll see a poll pop up in just a moment with 3 questions. The first is asking how long you've worked in advocacy. And as always, our webinars are open to everybody. You're welcome, even if you're not working in advocacy. That's the last option there. If you are, in a different field, please mark that. Our second question, how frequently do you find yourself collaborating, whether that's personal or professionally? That may be daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, or never. And then our third question, how effective do you generally find that collaboration to be? Is it perfect? You wouldn't change a thing. Perhaps there's some room for improvement, but generally it's great. Sometimes it's effective, or maybe sometimes it feels a bit like going in circles. Or is your collaboration nearly always ineffective, and cutting back on that would be a better use of resources? So I see a few, I guess many actually, responses coming in. We'll leave that open for just a bit longer. If you aren't able to access the poll, please feel free to put your responses in the chat. And we'll give folks maybe another few seconds here to respond, maybe 3, 2. I see a few more coming in. And then let's go ahead and we'll end the poll. Again, if you're adding those responses, please pop those into the chat. But I want to share the answers here. You should be seeing these coming up. So Nia, it looks like we've got a good mix of folks all over the spectrum in terms of advocacy. Some who are very new, a few who have been here a good long while, and then about a quarter of our folks who are in a different field. Welcome everybody. Glad you're here. Ooh, a good number. I see over 50% of folks who collaborate every single day, about a quarter weekly and 20% or so yearly. So good mix there. And then no one says their collaboration is perfect. So we definitely have things to learn from you today. Just a few saying there's room for improvement, but generally great. Vast majority, over 90%, say sometimes collaborating is effective and sometimes it feels like it's going in circles. So thank you everybody for your feedback. And Nia, I'm going to turn it over to you to share how we can be, what we should be thinking about in collaboration and how we can be improving it. So thank you.
Thank you, Piper. Thank you so much for having me. And hi, everyone who was able to join. I'm really excited to get into this conversation today. So I am going to share my screen. Just to give folk a little visual anchor. I know it's Friday afternoon, we have things to do. I hope everyone can see that. And I am just going to get into it. So hi again, everyone. I am Nia Davis Sagona, and I am the founder of Root and Bloom Strategies. Like Piper said, my background is in education law and policy, kind of at that intersection. I'm an attorney by training. I'm a good immigrant kid. I went to law school, having chosen not to go to medical school or get my engineering degree. And I really saw law then and now as the foundation on which we build our policy and our practice. And throughout my time in education, both K-12 and higher ed, I realized that there was a common thread to all of these rooms that I was in, right? I've been in the local school district. I've worked with charter schools and charter school accountability, worked with state university systems. I've worked advocating on the Hill to federal policymakers. I've worked within membership organizations and within like the operational and strategic parts of it with my roles as chief of staff. And all these rooms where it happened, sorry if I give too many musical theater references, but in all of these rooms, the common thread, the recurring theme were silos. There was always, someone in one department who didn't want to necessarily collaborate with someone in another department because that's a completely different field and like they don't understand what I'm doing and I don't really understand what they're doing. So we're just going to keep our heads down and keep pushing forward in our silos. And I saw that happening a lot on the individual, team, and organizational level. So earlier this year, I decided to found Root and Bloom Strategies to help leaders and organizations break down those silos and build up collaborative teams and coalitions for systems change. So I'm so excited to chat with you today about all of that. And I just want to say for the next 15, maybe 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to go through a couple of slides that give us some grounding and context in what collaboration really is, what I mean when I'm talking about collaboration, why collaboration is such an important skill and strategy right now and in the days, months, years to come, and how to really break down those silos and collaborate for systems change. So let's start with a tree. When you see a tree, do you see a silo or an ecosystem? I was chatting with Piper earlier and we were having kind of our prep conversation. And I shared with her that part of the reason why I named Root and Bloom Strategies what I did is because we treat trees like individual entities, but when you really look at it, a tree's roots grow down and out, and they kind of share resources with trees in the surrounding area. Their root system goes far beyond the circumference of their canopy. It's like really an interactive and interconnected system. And even so, their branches, they bloom up, they grow out, they create a canopy, and there's a whole ecosystem of actors that go into making them survive and thrive as trees, right? There's the birds and the soil and the rain and the sun. And so it's not a silo, it's an ecosystem. And if we extrapolate that into the work of systems change, part of the thing that we recognize is that unlike the kind of siloed disciplines that we've been approaching things in, our work as systems change agents is all connected. I think honestly, the pandemic did a lot to reveal that for some people, just that the conversation about childcare is a conversation about the workforce, and a conversation about climate change has to include a conversation about public health. And things that we're thinking about in the space of AI and technological advancement are deeply entrenched with the things that we're thinking about in terms of education and skills. So it's an ecosystem. We're all connected and it's all interconnected. That said, we act as though we're disconnected, and we have a lot of good reasons, right? There are time constraints and money constraints and capacity and skill, and all of that kind of leads us to continuing to approach our work in these silos. Folks in the room who have done the work, you go into rooms where you intend to collaborate, but you kind of go with this sense that like you have the right answer, right? You have the theory of change. This is the genius initiative. This is the silver bullet that's gonna move the needle and create change. But if we're thinking about systems as ecosystems, right? They're dynamic, they change, they evolve, they're adaptive, they're constantly changing. The only constant is change. And so I think of the work with not impact as a static solution or one singular snapshot that we're able to talk about, but impact is a dynamic practice. I like to define impact qualitatively as an enduring and meaningful change or shift in practice and experience. Because if we're not talking about like what actually happens to the people who are interacting with this system, what actually happens to the way that this system is regularly interpreted or applied or changed, then what are we talking about if not that impact? And so impact is dynamic. And my vision of impact for Root and Bloom Strategies is to help create a world where systems support our collective thriving instead of getting in the way of it. So no one can change the world alone, but real collaboration is hard, as we've talked about already. And I included this visual here because I learned that we don't actually peak at self-actualization. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is actually incomplete. I learned a few years ago that Abraham Maslow spent about 6 weeks with the Siksika Blackfoot Nation in Canada area a few years before he published his theory of the hierarchy of needs. And that pyramid that we're all so familiar with, right, that starts kind of with this space of our basic needs, the food, the shelter, the safety, and kind of grows to this peak of self-actualization, is not the end, but the beginning for the Blackfoot philosophy. Their philosophy kind of starts with this, what I think of as a concentric circle of self-actualization, and then grows out into what that means for community actualization, and even further, what that means for cultural actualization, which they saw as happening through future generations. And so even though we've been approaching this work in this kind of siloed, individualistic, competitive way, again, if we really look at the work that we're doing in this ecosystemic lens, it kind of becomes clear that collaboration is how we create a lasting and enduring change in practice and experience. Again, it's hard. It's how it's always been done. It's what the data will show. It's what the funders will fund. It's what that team does. It's what that organization does. Or it's another, to your point, to all of your 91% of you, to the point of like, it's another working group. It's another task force. It's another community of practice. Like, what are we even going to do? How is this moving the needle? How is this a good use of your time and energy? But collaboration is hard, but it's necessary. And if you want to make an impact, collaboration is the essential skill and strategy for systems change in the 21st century. So bears repeating, collaboration is the essential skill and strategy for impactful systems change in the 21st century. First of all, collaboration is a skill, right? It can be taught, it can be practiced, it can be strengthened. And while it feels a little squishy, and I think most people might categorize collaboration as a soft skill, again, those of us who've done the work or are trying to do the work know that the soft skills are the hard skills. And we're seeing increasing recognition of this too. I've seen so many different names for soft skills, right? Enduring skills, emotional quotient skills, human skills, people skills, leadership skills. But throughout all of it, there is a recognition that it is something that we must learn and practice to be able to move our work forward. Second of all, collaboration is a strategy. It is a lens through which we can create a plan of action. And it's a strategy actually that we're all familiar with, clearly. But even to a certain extent, as individuals, teams, and organizations, we've all engaged in some type of strategic collaboration, right? As individuals, we've reached out to that team member who sits on another team but does work that is similar to ours or related to ours and that we need to keep in touch. For me, like I was always either on the legal team or the policy team, and that meant I needed to get my monthly with the comms team because I needed to know what we were talking about, and I needed to get my monthly with the data team because I needed to know what we were learning and be able to integrate that into the work that I was doing in any given moment, right? So as individuals, we collaborate. As teams, we collaborate. How many people have been on a cross-matrix team that pulls from different parts of the organization to kind of get the skills and experience necessary to move forward on the deliverable that you were looking for? For me, I've worked both on teams that were internal and had one person who was excellent at getting the events booked and negotiating all of the hotels and everything, and another person who was excellent at pulling together the membership that we were putting a conference on for, and communicating with them and creating a full community. And then I'd be there helping them set the agenda and thinking through strategically how we were keeping this work sustainable. And as a team, we were all collaborating. And then finally, as organizations, we're familiar with it too. How many times have you gone in as the representative of your organization in some kind of task force or working group, and you needed to consider what the organization was going to be able to contribute to this effort and what they were going to be able to get from an effort and what they were going to be able to learn and move forth, all of which was there for impact. So again, collaboration is an essential skill and strategy for systems change. And then in particular, when we're talking about systems, one of the definitions that I like to use is pretty nice, short and sweet. A system is a process plus a set of people, right? By definition, a system is about the interconnected entities in a thing. But we have the written process that we see in things like our written laws, our policies, et cetera, handbooks, what have you. But there are also the people who are interpreting these laws, policies, handbooks, who are experiencing them and coming up against the challenges and shortcomings of them, and are, going through life through these systems. And so collaboration, last time I promise, but it bears repeating, collaboration is the essential skill and strategy for impactful systems change in the 21st century. Cool, but how? Because that sounds like a lot. And how do you even wrap your head around something that kind of by definition, you're not able to wrap your head around? But I have an actionable framework that we use at Root and Bloom Strategies for all of the coaching, advising, and facilitation and workshops that we put forward. And that is this deceptively simple 3-part strategy approach for collaborating for systems change. The first part is coming together. The second part is focusing your energy. And the third is sustaining and evolving. So I like to see collaboration as kind of a life cycle. So you'll see here, we've got the seed and the root and the bloom and the fruit. And all of these pieces of the life cycle are active. And so the first part of coming together for collaboration and systems change is the seed and the root, right? You need to kind of know what you're doing and put something in the ground, start something, and start to root it down and really ground yourself in what you're doing and start creating your interconnected system of information and stakeholders. And so that kind of breaks down in the framework to a few parts. One and first is what I call acknowledging the whole elephant, which, if you'll allow me to mix metaphors a little bit, for those of you who aren't familiar with the parable of the blind men and the elephant, there's this set of these blind men and they've never seen an elephant before. And so someone takes them to a physical elephant and puts their hands on each part of it. And one blind man grabs the tusk and says, oh, an elephant is a spear. And another grabs the tail and says, oh, an elephant is a rope. And someone grabs the ear and says, oh, an elephant is a fan. And the point is that it is an entity that is so large that any one person cannot create a full picture of it. But together you can report out and create a larger understanding of what it is you're doing. So how do you set that perspective? How do you create that perspective check? And then, on an individual level, like collaboration, again, is a soft skill for better or worse. And so what does that look like in practice? It looks like a certain commitment to humility when you're coming onto a table and trying to see the bigger picture, a certain sense of curiosity and even imagination, so that you're able to see something that will move you forward into something that can grow. And then, of course, that includes some reflection and self-awareness. I think underneath all of this, though, is a commitment to building true connection through authentic relationship. We're humans. Be human. Treat yourself like a human. Treat other people like a human. Talk to them. Figure out what you're doing together. That's what coming together is all about. When we move to focusing energy, that's kind of the growth area and the blooming area. And that is both what people tend to think about when you say focus energy, right? You need to clarify a shared vision, and think of what your North Star is. What are you even doing together? Why have you come together? What is this for? And what are you moving toward? And I think what tends to happen with collaborations is people will do that kind of at the beginning and then write it down and leave it somewhere and never look at it again, or look at it when it's time to give like a grant report or an impact report on what it is was happening. But that North Star is, again, like the act and the practice of collaboration, it is dynamic. It continues, it moves on and evolves with your work. And then focusing energy is also about prioritizing real impact. And impact is a tricky word. I know that a lot of people are in conversations about like, what does that even mean? How do we even measure that? But I think that impact is both the thing that we need to learn how to measure, but also a question of resilience, accountability, and commitment. How much are we willing to commit to creating different movements or adapting our approach when things are hard or when things show that they need to change? How are we holding ourselves accountable? How are we measuring these things and then looking back at those measurements and drawing insights from that and sharing that? And how are we staying committed to all of this? How are we making sure that the impact that we're talking about, again, is that change in experience and practice in the systems level and for the individuals that are touching these systems? And so that's all about focusing your energy. And then finally, there's sustaining and evolving, which I see as kind of like the branch and the fruit. No one's ever asked this, but the Root and Bloom Strategies tree is supposed to be a mango tree. So that's a mango. The practice of sustaining and evolving collaboration is the recognition that it is a long game that we are playing when we're talking about systems change. It is very urgent. Yes, we need to do it now. Everything, like we can't wait to make a change. However, it is a slow and plodding long game. And there needs to be some commitment to regularly practicing the skill of collaboration intentionally, regularly practicing and implementing the strategy of collaboration intentionally. That's what it means to sustain and evolve and keep moving and growing with the ecosystem. And then that also means developing some infrastructure around yourself to be able to support that sustainability that we're all looking for. And so, yes, that means the tactical, practical, like, what kind of time are you putting into this? What kind of money are you getting for this? Like, who are the people who are able to contribute to this? That's definitely all part of that infrastructure and support. But it's also, how do you support your energy throughout this long game? How do you support your focus? Are you staying focused on the right things? How do you know? Are you staying committed? And how do you support that long-term commitment and accountability that's required of systems change and thinking of things in an systemic way? So in total, the collaboration for systems change, it is a very kind of deceptively simple 3 parts of coming together, focusing energy, and sustaining and evolving. And while it's a very simple concept, I think everyone here knows it is difficult work. But it is necessary work. Collaboration will help us create the impact that we seek. I truly believe that together we can break down silos and create an ecosystem that supports our collective thriving. And I am so excited to continue the conversation with you all. This is my last slide, if you couldn't tell. But I'm so excited to continue the conversation with you all and with Piper. And I think the way that I'm going to do that, Piper, is by asking you, how did you answer the survey questions? How frequently do you collaborate, and how effective do you find it?
I love the questions, but first, Nia, I just want to say thank you. I mean, it is having you share this is just so exciting. Having been in so many spaces with so much collaboration, where sometimes, if I can be really candid, it does feel messy and it feels disorienting. And so having this three, like, okay, we're at the coming together phase. And now we're going to focus. And now we're both in the elegance of both. We're evolving and sustaining. We're both staying the course but changing. So thank you. I in hindsight can make so much more sense of a lot of collaborations I've been in that didn't make sense at the time.
I'm so glad to hear that. That's what the actionable framework is for, right? To be able to really apply it to your work.
Yeah. And then be able to dig into each phase. So I have so many questions, but first I'll answer yours. I think over the years, I mean, I found myself at least weekly, in different organizations, big and small, always being in coalition, which I think
Mhm.
for folks who are, maybe further in their career, it may seem like, oh, of course. And then I think early on in my career, though, I thought, well, why are we in collaboration, especially in the nonprofit space where it feels like
Mhm.
this is our grant, this is our mission, how does this fit into a bigger picture? And now I'm seeing, to your point, like we cannot change entire systems alone. It's certainly
Mhm.
not alone as individuals and not alone in organizations. So seeing that bigger fit, how we all work together. So I think I'd say if not daily, then definitely weekly. And the effectiveness really depends. And this is where I want to dig in with you. I mean, there's so many things that are coming up. I want to remind folks though that this is your conversation too. So please put things in the Q&A and we'll reach those. I think where I want to dig in is that notion. I think of the many things I appreciate of your framework, you said many times like how we're human, that humanity, that the being real in, not everything will be perfect. We'll make mistakes. We need to make space for that. We need to, account for our own need for breaks at times. But it really struck me that the hierarchy of needs and how
Mhm.
often we're thinking about it, just even that the different images where that comes up to a point and that feels sharp and uncomfortable. And I felt myself feeling more of a sigh of relief in seeing that
Mhm.
the circle, it reminds me, it's like the earth and how we're all connected. Can you share a bit more about how, like, what does that shift mean going from thinking just the self-actualization to a larger view?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and that's so beautiful that you had this like sigh of relief, because that invoked in me this sense of like expansiveness, right? Which it doesn't necessarily feel like a pyramid can expand
Mhm.
naturally, but a sphere, right? An ecosystem definitely is constantly moving open, more and more open and expanding. And so yeah, no, thinking about the idea of self-actualization not as the end, but kind of the beginning of what our needs are as humans. I have been thinking a lot about, we're going to get into it. I've been thinking a lot about defying gravity.
Yes.
Couldn't help myself because this is what I wrote my entire newsletter about recently.
Which, if you haven't
Um,
read it, we will include that in the links. It is awesome. You have to read it, everybody. You do.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a theater kid. I'm sorry, but not sorry in advance. So in Defying Gravity, right? Spoiler alerts for everyone who hasn't seen it. Sorry, at this point, sorry. It's been around for 21 years. But in Defying Gravity, the Wicked Witch of the West kind of realizes her power and kind of steps into it. And she flies and literally defies gravity. And it's a huge end of the act before the intermission, and obviously before this year-long intermission in between the two movies. And in Defying Gravity, if you're listening to the lyrics, one of the things that kind of gets evoked is this idea that like, I have a responsibility to step into my power. I can't pretend that this isn't mine, that this isn't my power inside of me. I have this thing, in my middle school, we had a motto, and it was, to whom much is given, much is required. So like, I have this thing, much is required of me, right? To do something with this internal power. And I think of it, like not in terms of the wicked universe, but in terms of real life. Like, we have all had these moments where like, this is my thing to say in this moment. Like, they will hear me if I say this in this way in this moment, right? Or this is my story to share. Or, this is this is the hill I'm gonna die on. And like, if anyone wants to be convinced, come talk to me, right? Like, we all have those things. And that is, a glimmer of that self-actualization that I think Maslow would argue, or had argued in his hierarchy of needs. Like, that's kind of it. That's it. We've reached the peak. We figured out what we need to do. But moving into that kind of Siksika, Blackfoot philosophy of things, I have this power and I have to do it. I have to use it because it will affect the larger whole, because it is part of what will affect the ecosystem. Because if I don't say it, who will? If I don't do it, who will, right? And there's that community actualization. And then I think, again, just thinking about your everyday experience of this, what does it look like to think about cultural actualization, about like generations forward? I think a lot of us are familiar with the indigenous philosophy of 7 generations, right? Thinking 7 generations ahead every time you're considering a policy move, or any move that impacts your community. But I think that in terms of like systems change and collaborating for systems change, that cultural actualization is recognizing that the work we're doing isn't just to support the ecosystem right now as we see it, but as it continues to change and evolve. Which, back to your original point about being human, like, we don't know what's going to happen. And so while we can't necessarily control this sphere, we do have influence from our individual sphere of self-actualization. And that's kind of how it all ties back and forth for me.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so much that's in your framework. And I think a lot of this tension, and maybe tension isn't the right word, but just that, how complex it can be, and how
Mm.
all of us, that responsibility to step into our power and do the things we can, also recognizing that's for the sake of other people to step into theirs. And so we're
Mhm.
all in this space together. And I think that's something that we see in coalitions sometimes, for a variety of reasons. Whereas I need the credit for my own ego, or I need the
Mhm.
credit for my own organization, for my own funding, and so I'm curious, where would you encourage folks to think about, or how would you encourage folks to think about humility in all
Mhm.
of this?
Yeah. Yeah. That is definitely, I struggled a little bit with putting that word into the framework, because it can be such like a triggering word for people. That and ego can also be a triggering word for people. But I think it is productive and it's generative to look at it from a framework of, again, we're all human. We all have our egos. We all have our things that we're going to want to kind of hold jealously to ourselves. And to your point about like, maybe the funders, this is what they're funding, and maybe this, I won't get the credit for this. There is an experience of competition that we have had to exist in. But when we talk about humility, and when we talk about coming together and focusing our energy, I like to think about impact. In the context of real impact, again, that like change in practice and experience, I know that doing the work to some extent requires both my leadership and my followership. It
Mm.
requires that sometimes I will step forward with the thing that's in my heart, because I know it's the thing that needs to be said. But sometimes I'm not the person who needs to be saying the thing. And to recognize that in the context of like, what is going to contribute to us moving closer to impact, that's the humility I'm talking about. And that's the humility that I've seen in really great leaders who are able to engage in coalitions or lead teams, even just internally, and recognize that like, sometimes I'm going to be the person with the answer. I'm going to be the sage on the stage, so to speak. But sometimes I need to sit in a circle, and like there's good reason for that, right? There's so much that each of us can contribute to this conversation, and recognizing that is a part of the work.
I love that, and I hear you. I think it's interesting though, where folks are uncomfortable with ego or humility. I'd question, maybe dig a little deeper as to why. And you're touching on something we talk about it in Stories Change Power about the messenger, where
Mm,
sometimes it's not you. Who is the most effective person? So I love the way you phrase that. And like sometimes it's that leadership, and sometimes it's practicing the followership. So.
mhm,
We've got a question here from Melissa I want to turn to. She says, I've seen the word collaboration thrown around in a lot of different ways, meaning a lot of different things to different teams. Good point. What
mhm.
is a good way to level set expectations of collaborations across teams and across silos?
Mm. So I like to think, I don't know, I can't remember if in my slides I should have shared the internal definition that I have of
Mm.
collaboration at Root and Bloom Strategies. I like to think of collaboration as connecting on purpose for a purpose. So when you're coming into a conversation that you hope is going to be collaborative, and like you said, it's thrown around in all of these different circles, the first question I would ask is, are you coming together on purpose, or are you just being thrown together? And are
Mm.
you coming together for a purpose, or are you just kind of hanging out? Because I think without one of those two things, it's not really collaboration. And in having those two conversations, I think that then helps with the level setting that you were asking about, because there is a certain sense of like, all right, we're coming together on purpose. How often are we coming together? What are we willing to contribute as we coming together? What does together mean? Like, do we have to meet a quorum? Are we just coming together with these voices sometimes? Like, what does that look like in coming together? And then, are we coming together for a purpose? What are we doing with all of this information, with all of this resource? How are we moving forward and closer to, again, what I would normally it ends up coming down to some vision of impact that we're moving closer together toward. So yeah, that's I'd start the conversation there, and then kind of see how people end up balancing out in that conversation.
I love that. And thank you for the question, Melissa. I mean, that sounds like being clear, that first step of being clear around the purpose and goals is a good place to start. So
Yeah.
encourage folks that if there's other questions, please pop those in the Q&A. I can ask questions for days on this. I want to dig into something that I think we can overlook whenever we're at an organization with a particular mission. It can come to feel like there our way is that the one, if only we could do this thing, it would be the thing that fixes everything.
Mhm.
And that just, I think hopefully when we take a step back, we realize like, okay, that's not actually realistic. But can you comment more on that, on the fact that there's no one silver bullet in any of this?
Yeah. Ooh, that goes back to the we're human part. Because again, I think the pandemic shifted a lot of things for a lot of people. But one of the things in my own life that it shifted was recognizing that I do not have control. I cannot control everything that happens in the world. And for those of us who are high achievers and recovering perfectionists and any version of any of those things, um, uh, we know that control is an illusion, but it's the thing that makes us feel good. Why would you go to work every day for something you can't control? Like, why would you go in and not have some guarantee that there would be some return on this time and energy then and dedication that you're investing? And so I recognize, just like the human knee-jerk reaction to want to be able to control a thing and say, we are looking for this change in this data point of impact, and that is something that we can control.
Mhm.
Or we are looking for this recurring shit, this report is going to, like you said, illuminate the one theory of change, the way that it's everyone, once they understand this, they'll understand everything and it'll all fall into place, because that's what we can control.
Mhm.
And I have landed on this idea of collaboration because while it's not a static solution that we might be able to control or produce, it is something that we can practice that is within our control. Like collaboration for systems change, that feels like this whole big thing. But like you and I, Piper, we chatted, we caught up after years of not chatting with each other, and like now we're doing this webinar, and it's totally within your power as a human being to collaborate. And, to get a little wonky about the whole theory of my own theory of change.
Yeah.
I know I recognize the irony of this. I'm like arguing that this is the theory of change that'll change everything, guys. But wonkily in my theory of change, right, is the idea of fractals. So
Mhm.
a fractal being a thing that is kind of the same as you drill down into smaller subsections of it, a tree and a leaf and a particular stem, like they all show similar patterns. And collaboration works that way. And so if you look at that from the inverse, you and I collaborating can create a larger collaboration and ripples throughout the work of systems change. And I really see that as possible. So yeah, that's how I think about that. Is that we have this idea that maybe we're going to be the one savior to fix all the things. But we have an opportunity to kind of shift that sense of control, not from being the savior, but to contributing to the collective thriving.
I love that. And it's yeah, no one of us can do it all, but all of us together have that potential. And so I think that the next question I have then is thinking about, you know, we cannot control everything, but having the space where we're operating from is so important. But then there are some roles that feel a little bit more exciting than others. So what would you say when there's things that there's the big fun stuff to do, and that then there's what might feel a little bit more like drudgery, but still needs to be done in collaboration and in coalition. What do you say to that?
That's my knee jerk. I haven't said this to you yet, but I grew up in theater and like there are no small actors. I mean, there are no small parts, only small
Yeah,
actors.
don't say that. I was like always, I was like in the chorus or in like the third
But
string, and you were the star. So
this is
I was in
important.
small role,
Okay, but this
but I
is
hear
the
you in
point.
theory.
This is the point. The chorus is important. If I'm not singing alto, the whole chord is off. Like I was in the chorus too. Don't worry, I wasn't always the star. Trust me. But truly, there are no small parts. There are only small actors, and I think that's one way to look at it, right? Where no matter what you're doing, you are contributing. Hopefully, you're on a team where you're regularly talking about what that contribution is, because I think that sometimes what ends up happening in the situations that you're describing isn't that someone's like, ugh, like that part is so much greater. I want that. It's more like, why am I doing this? Like, what? Why am I spending my time doing this? I could be doing so many other things, right? So, no small parts, just small actors, and recognizing that, that needs to be kind of reinforced and you need to continually clarify what that means for people. But I also think that everyone has their gifts, right? Like you shared that in your newsletter. And in general, we were talking about this, but there are some things that light me up. Like, let's talk about data, quant, qual, I don't care. Let's
Uh,
talk about AI and what that means for the ways that we create a social contract as humans in the future. Let's go there. Let's talk about strategic advising. Let's talk about pulling teams together and creating systems that support that. Like, that is my jam. I have said this to people, and people are like, I get like a tingly, like itchy feeling when someone says strategic advising. Like, I don't know what that is. Like, what do you mean I have to work with other people? Or like, what do you mean I have to work by myself to deliver this thing? So we all have our gifts, and I really do think that to the extent that we allow ourselves to recognize that and lean into that, the collaborations become easier because like I've spent how many minutes now talking about theater? That is not my degree. Like I didn't do this, professionally. It's just for funsies. But it is experience that I continually bring to the work that I do, right? Being on stage, working on a team, and being able to recognize that the moving parts come together to create this really beautiful whole.
Yeah, that's so true. And in my little bit of theater experience, I think about all the roles, including the folks who are backstage, with the
Mhm.
lighting, the curtains, and so I think, if we're doing this well, coming back to your point of being human and recognizing other people's humanity, and it may not be the most visible role, but it takes all of us. And so ideally, you've got somebody, finding that balance of their talents and the things they are good at already, the things they want to be learning, and all of that can come together in a way where everybody feels appreciated, and hopefully finding some joy along the way, because
Yeah.
all this work it's a lot, and life is too short not to have some joy in there somewhere too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you bring up joy too, because that's something that I've really actively worked to create fuel with throughout my career. I think that there have been so many conversations I've been in where people say something like, "Oh, but that won't happen in my lifetime. Like
Mm,
we're trying to make change, but that won't happen in my lifetime. Like just gotta keep on keeping on." And to that, I challenge it in two ways. One, like if we don't imagine that it can happen, how can it? And then two, that like, is that the best source of fuel to keep you moving and motivated for the long game? Like, trust me, I've had my moments where I've been completely disillusioned and dejected and discouraged, but I think at the end of the day, in order to keep moving forward, you have to find some kind of fuel. For some
mm,
people, that's anger, and I don't, have any judgment on that because anger is a powerful fuel. For
mm.
me personally, I cannot sustain that, but what I can sustain is joy and a future that I see myself existing in joy and the people around me existing in joy.
Yeah, it's such a good point, and a big, I mean, I feel like we could, well, we already know this, we could talk for hours, but
Yeah,
I think I don't think anger is sustainable for anybody. I
mm,
think that, and we're living in a time with a lot of anger and a lot of fear. And so hopefully as we're in collaboration and coalition, there are times that folks, we get to take turns in that, where we have our days where we're feeling down and somebody else has the cause for hope
yeah,
or is feeling, all of
yeah,
that is another, benefit on top of accomplishing your purpose. And I see a really great question from Dana coming in here that I think might relate, where she says, when an organization is going through a transition that feels disruptive to most of their teams, how does an organization first start to have the conversation around collaboration when trust is absent? So when we're feeling, low, and when there's all this disruption, how do you start that conversation?
yeah. That is an excellent question and a great place for people to kind of lean into that part about humility. And I think this is now the recurring theme of our whole conversation, but that humanness of recognizing that, like, if you are feeling this sense of tension, this sense of distrust, this sense of, kind of us and them, then
Mhm.
everyone else is probably feeling that too. And naming that has so much power. I have seen so much transformation from a leader usually who is kind of tasked with moving forward and getting to the next step, like pulling the team together and rallying the troops somehow, and going into the conversation with other leaders and with other people who are able to influence the larger culture of that team, and saying, I don't know what's next. Right now, this is what it looks like. It looks like an us and them. I'd like to get here, but I'm not sure what the bridge between here and there looks like. What we can do is start from an honest and humble place of like, this is what I'm experiencing, and this is what I think it's attributed to. What are you experiencing? And what do you think it's attributed to? And, that can't happen in one conversation, especially if, like you described, Dana, it's just distrust everywhere and there's like all this change happening throughout the organization. But again, that sense of fractals, how can you seed that on different teams? How can you make sure that the teams who are the most influential on the culture, because there always are those teams, how can you make sure that they are approaching their work collaboratively and are able to kind of start spreading that out to their larger colleagues and community?
And would you see this I'm thinking of that cycle where there's the, sustain and evolve. It sounds like some major evolution. So then coming back into the coming together. Does that fit in the
It
cycle?
absolutely does. One of the things I like to tell people, also, none of whom have asked. So it's a mango tree, and
Mhm.
mango trees produce fruit, which produce seeds, which produce more trees. And it's an ongoing cycle, it's an ongoing life cycle of collaboration. So, yes, exactly that. There's this sense of learning from a particular collaboration, sharing out the fruit of that. Oh my goodness, where did that come from? Sharing out the fruit, there we go, sharing out the fruit of that collaboration, and then using those seeds, planting those seeds in other parts to continue the work, because again, it needs to constantly evolve.
Yeah. What is a misconception about collaboration that if you hear in many places and just wish if there's something that you could, set the record straight on collaboration, what would that be?
Collaboration is super easy. I learned that in kindergarten. I don't need that. That's a soft skill. No one, like, that's not real. That's not the real work. Like, the real work is over here. I mean, that was many things, but it's all one theme of dismissiveness to the the expertise that goes behind the skill and strategy of collaboration. It's not something that you can just, like, we've learned in so many contexts, but again, I'm going to bring the pandemic back up. We've learned you can't just throw people into a room, virtual or physical, and expect them to produce something of value just together magically. Collaboration takes intent, right? It takes a certain level of going in and saying, okay, I'm choosing these particular people to have this conversation because I know that they'll be able to move this work forward. Or I'm engaging as this organization in a larger coalition because I only deal with education and this person over there deals with childcare. And in order to make a change for students who have children, we need to work together.
Yeah.
And so it's a sense of kind of recognizing that coming together is really important.
And I think one of the many pearls of wisdom that you dropped in your presentation, like this notion of soft skills actually being the hard skills. And I
Mhm.
cannot tell you how many times people underestimate, oh, well, that didn't require a PhD. It didn't require, not, there's no formal training.
Mhm.
Wow, is it tough? And I think particularly a lot of the spaces that we're in as stories change power in, we're bridging different divides in any number of ways, talking about politics, talking about race, gender, I mean, just fill in the blank in all
Yeah.
the ways that as a country and maybe even beyond, we're
Mhm.
feeling those divisions. That's not easy. And so I really appreciated like these are durable skills. These are important skills. It's not, so this notion of like it's soft, it just feels like it's a undervaluing of
Yeah.
just how tricky it is.
Yeah, yeah. And just how impactful it is, right? Like, it's tricky, it's a hard concept. I mean, it's a simple concept in theory, but in practice, it's really difficult. But in practice, it's also really worthwhile. I think that's the other thing that, people don't necessarily connect to collaboration because of this soft skill framing, is
Mhm.
that that's the thing that, like, we can't measure, therefore doesn't make a difference, but it does. And, like, I
Mhm.
argue it makes the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'd argue there are ways we may be a little bit more creative, but to measure it and
Hmm.
have that value be more visible and therefore more prioritized and more funded and all good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a little soapbox on that I'm just gonna
Please get on.
step onto right now.
Yes. Yes.
The world is changing so fast, including our technology. Our ability to measure data is moving at speeds that y'all don't even get. Like, our mouse movements are being tracked, right? Like, we have so much data. We are living in this abundance of information. And we now also have a lot of technology to process this data. And as we continue to iterate on that technology, there are going to be, to your point, more and more creative ways to capture information. And I'd really argue that we currently already have ways to talk about collaboration. What do all the social media platforms look at when they're looking at their data? Right? Like, how are you able to claim that you're creating a community if you can't track it?
Mhm.
And so, like, I think that there's sometimes it comes down to a conversation of, like, what's the impact, therefore what's the data. But I think we really need to examine what we think is possible in terms of the data that we collect, measure, and then draw insights from.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. I want to encourage folks, the questions are still open. Again, if we're not able to get to those in the next few minutes, we both have newsletters, we have ways, we'll still reach back to you because this is like such a rich discussion. I'd love to hear, Nia, when you're working with folks, what is a common breakthrough that you see from your clients who are trying to improve on their collaboration? I'd love to hear something that, hopeful here.
Yeah, of course. Um, I think it's back to that conversation about, like, what's in your control, right? At the end of the day, recognizing that that conversation that you just had with your colleague from the other team, and you've been trying to get them to understand what you've been saying week after week, meeting after meeting, and finally having that conversation and realizing that the repetition and the continued support and the relationship that you've built with that person has come to fruition, right? Has created a space where the two of you can connect better and can collaborate and share resources and create an impact. And so I think that just that idea of having a regular an accessible practice that is something that they can choose to do every day in whatever context we're talking about. If this client is a leader of a team, if this client is seeking kind of coaching for their own individual leadership and approach, or if they're thinking about their strategic plan in the context of like an organization or a department, there's this sense of agency. I mean, that's again, I'm a word nerd, so like I chose to call my agency an agency for a reason. And that's that understanding that like you do have the power to create change, and it may feel slow, but it is effective. It is impactful.
I love that. So having that clarity, and then it sounds like it kind of spreads around you going forward.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
awesome. Awesome. Okay, so we have covered a lot. If there is one thing that you want people to take away from today and remember, what would that be?
Yeah. I said it like 1,000 times. I will say it one more time. Collaboration is an essential skill and strategy for systems change in the 21st century. And it is how we will all make an impact together.
I love that. And we have a comment from Jillian. Thank you. Without going to big programs, data entry processes, AI, we can create infographics, videos,
Mhm.
art events, photo galleries, all tangible ways for community members or collaborators alike to digest, if I can say the word, and track, and the
Yeah,
invisible work of co-creation and making that visible. So absolutely. Thank you,
yeah.
Jillian. And thank you everyone for joining. It's really been a joy to talk with you today, Nia. This is part of an ongoing series. We'll announce our 2025 webinars early next year. When you leave the webinar, a poll will pop up. Please be a helper. That takes about 15 seconds. We really value your input. We'll have things in the chat here, how to connect with Nia and stay in touch. You can book a time for collaboration. We'll include those as well with the recording. And if you're watching this on YouTube, check out down in the comments. We'll have information for you there. So be well, everyone. Do good and have a wonderful rest of the year.
Take care, y'all. Thank you.
Thanks, Nia.